Hey, hi students, welcome back. This is the third recording for Unit 8, focusing on the treatment of psychological disorders. In the last recording, I finished the lecture by talking about behavioral therapies, and behavioral therapies focus on reducing and eliminating maladaptive behavior, and do so by focusing on the overt responses the person displays. So this is a school of thought that regards the overt responses or the behavior as being the source of the problem, rather than the problem being some underlying thought or emotion. And so because behaviors are learned, according to the school of thought, they are learned, the maladaptive behaviors once learned can be unlearned through the same learning mechanisms or through the same principles of classical or operant conditioning that were responsible for their initial acquisition. And so this is also relevant for types of disorders that involve excessive or maladaptive fears, such as phobias. So phobia is an excessive and irrational fear of an object or situation to the point that it impairs a person's ability to function. So it impairs functioning and the ability to carry out daily activities. So one way to treat phobias is through systematic desensitization. And this has at its core the voluntary and gradual exposure to the feared object. Okay, so the person has to think about coming up with a list, a hierarchy of feared scenes, going from the least feared scene to the most frightening or fearful scene. And at each level of this hierarchy, the person will be supervised by their therapist to associate a new response to that feared object. Okay, so rather than it being frightening and threatening, perceived as being dangerous or a threat, the person is now starting to associate each scene within this hierarchy as a safe, associated with relaxation techniques. So it's going to become able to calm the mind and calm the body. And once they experience that quietude and calmness, they're going to associate the experience of the feared object, whether it be real or imagined, they're going to associate it with safety. Okay, so the original association that sustained the phobia, which is writing an exam is a threatening and dangerous situation, is going to be replaced by writing an exam is a safe and non-threatening situation. So here's an example. The person lists going from least threatening to most threatening scene. So they go from a month before an examination where the event is still at a safe distance from the person, is still 30 days away, to 5 days before the examination, that's level 5, and then gradually progressing until it gets more and more threatening and dangerous in the person's mind. So this is just a hierarchy that the therapist and the clients will work with. And at each level, the client will start at level 1 and will be guided through relaxation techniques in order to achieve a state where they can calm their mind and their body while they're imagining writing the exam, or they're actually in a classroom writing an exam. So they're going to start with level 1, and if they can achieve that relaxation, then they're going to graduate or progress to level 2, and then gradually work through each level until they reach the most frightening situation of being in the actual examination room and writing the paper. And so this is gradual exposure to the frightening stimulus. Okay, and it's called systematic desensitization because the person is starting to associate what they previously feared with a safe and non-threatening outcome. So now we're going to look at another form of behavioral therapy, which is operant conditioning. So this involves unlearning maladaptive behavior Okay, so whereas in systematic desensitization, unlearning occurs not through a voluntary, by altering a voluntary response. Rather, it's unlearned by changing the associated outcome with an experience. So whereas it used to be perceived as threatening and dangerous, now the experience is perceived as non-threatening and safe. But here the person is going to learn to suppress maladaptive behavior, because the positive reinforcement, the reward that previously sustained the maladaptive behavior may be removed. And so the person is going to start to, without the reward, the association that the reward supported, which is this is a pleasurable response, it's going to lead to a rewarding outcome, is going to be extinguished. Okay, so I'll give an example, but here, let's first describe what applied behavior analysis involves. So this is conducting an analysis of the individual's environment to determine which factors need to be modified. So the therapists are going to determine there are three elements, A, B, and C. So A stands for antecedents. Okay, so these are the triggers, the situation that trigger a maladaptive behavior. So B would be the maladaptive behavior, and that becomes the target that the therapist is trying to reduce or eliminate, and C is the consequence to that maladaptive behavior. So let's give an example. The child is asked by the parent to pick up their toys. Okay, so the child is asked to pick up their toys. That's the antecedent. The response or the behavior to that request from the parent is that the child has a temper tantrum, throw it on the ground. Okay, so that's the maladaptive behavior that the parent has called a psychologist to help them deal with. So the antecedent is the parent asks the child to pick up the toys. The child throws a temper tantrum. Okay, takes the toy and throws it on the floor. And then the consequence is that the parent ends up picking up the toys. Okay, so the analyst is going to say, okay, here's the antecedent, here's the behavior, and the consequence is that the parent steps in to pick up the toys. So the behavior of having a temper tantrum is reinforced by the child avoiding or the child not having to do what the parent asked them to do. Okay, so it's a form of the behavior has to now be suppressed. So the behavioral analyst will tell the parent, do not give this reward, because obviously it's rewarding, it's reinforcing the maladaptive behavior. So we have to come up with a different consequence. And the consequence can take many forms. It could be a punisher. Perhaps it could be the child doesn't get any more playtime. The child doesn't get access to his or her toys. Or it could be some other form of punishment, such as a child doesn't get any time watching TV or playing outside. So the consequence has to be changed so that it no longer supports the maladaptive behavior. Okay, so this is a very useful therapeutic technique. Okay, now we're going to look at cognitive therapies. So cognitive therapies emphasize the individual's thoughts or cognitions as being the main source of psychological problems. So they are the source of the abnormal behavior and emotions. And so it's less concerned with this is a form of therapy that is more concerned with replacing maladaptive thoughts with healthy cognitions. Again, so cognitions are a broader term to describe thoughts. So one way to do this is through cognitive restructuring. So the person's thinking pattern is maladaptive, it's problematic. It's leading to maladaptive. It's interfering with their functioning. So cognitive restructuring is a technique used by the cognitive therapy school of thought, and so it's a technique that aims to replace or to change a pattern of thought that is presumed to be at the root of the maladaptive behavior or emotion. So firstly, what this will involve, for there to be cognitive restructuring, the client has to recognize that there is some automatic self-defeating thought that they engage in. Okay, so first they have to recognize that there is an automatic self-defeating thought. So some common beliefs that are identified by cognitive therapists are, and these are erroneous beliefs, is if a person has absolute thinking or magnifies harm. So the person might say, I'm not good enough, or I'm never going to make it. That's very absolutist thinking. So this is an automatic thought that exacts a toll on the person's health. And so cognitive restructuring will involve making the client aware that they harbor these limiting thoughts that are erroneous. Okay, so the person's saying, I'm not good enough, I'm never going to make it. Okay, so it's an absolutist way of thinking. And so to recognize them, to identify that there's these self-defeating automatic thoughts, and to challenge these thoughts. Okay, so the challenge may be, was there ever a time that you were successful, where you tried to do something and you succeeded? Or what would somebody else say to you about this? If somebody who knows you well, would they tell you that? How would they respond to your statement? Okay, so the person is invited to challenge challenge these thoughts with their therapist, and then to replace them with positive ones. And a positive one may be, I can succeed if I try. Okay, so that's the main tenet of the cognitive therapies perspective. Okay, so now we're going to look at a specific form of cognitive therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So this is a form of therapy developed by Albert Bandura, and it has as its goal an aim to target both maladaptive cognitions, which are self-defeating thoughts, and behaviors that are maladaptive. So the goal is to change both the self-defeating thoughts and the maladaptive behavior, combining cognitive therapy with behavior therapy. So this could be an example of a constructivist statement that the therapist provides is a self-instructional method. So these are self-statements. So the person may have a self-defeating thought. They may say, I'm going to fail this exam because I didn't study hard enough. I didn't spend enough time studying. Okay, so that's a self-defeating thought. Okay, because it just limits the scope of what they can do in the exam. So one way to replace that is, I didn't study as much as I would have liked, but I still have a chance to do well on the exam. I'll focus on the things that I studied on. I'll focus on what I know, and I'll give it my best shot. And it's also known as a reinforcing self-statement. And this is something that they can repeat and repeat in order to meet their goals. Okay, so we're going to start by building up their self-efficacy. And this is what Albert Bandura talks about in his theories, self-efficacy. So this is the idea that a person can master a situation, has some adequate level of mastery to deal with a situation. Okay, so clients gain self-efficacy as they engage in adaptive behavior. So to become efficacious, to develop a sense of self-efficacy, the person needs to engage in adaptive behavior. And to do that, first they have to eradicate those self-defeating thoughts. Okay? And behavior is also challenged by exposing the person to their feared object. So the feared object, again, may be, they may be afraid of speaking in public. Okay, so in therapy, they can have a situation where they engage, they could be in a group-based cognitive behavioral therapy setting, and so they can speak in front of their group. Okay, so that's a good way to challenge them to confront the situation that they fear the most. Or they may have problems with social skills. They may have difficulty speaking to individuals. So people they come across in their life. Okay, so they may have a paralyzing fear of engaging in conversation with someone they don't yet know. So this is where they could practice. They can start to confront their fear in the therapeutic setting. Okay? So these are all focus how treatment is targeted. It targets both the self-defeating thoughts. It incorporates behavior therapy in order to help participants challenge and confront their feared situations. And it also involves self-instructional methods where the person engages in repeating these constructive statements. Again, the example was a person saying they may have a self-defeating thought, and the person says, I'm going to fail this exam because I didn't study hard enough, or I didn't spend enough time studying. And the self-constructive thought statement would be, I didn't spend as much time as I wanted to study, but I can still do well on the exam. I'll do my best. I'll focus on what I know, and I'll give it my best shot. Okay, now we're going to talk about therapy integrations. So many psychotherapists identify many psychotherapists identify themselves as not adherent to one particular method. So they may say that they don't they're not strictly following a particular school of thought or any techniques associated with a particular school of thought. But instead, they refer to themselves as being eclectic or integrative. Okay, so these are integrative methods are methods that combine techniques from different therapies. And so the therapist may use their own judgment in a particular situation and understand that this person may need a blend of two therapies. They may need a blend of psychodynamic and cognitive behavioral therapy in order for their treatment to most effectively benefit and help them cope with their problem. Okay, so this integrative therapy describes a combination of techniques from different therapies. Okay, so it's a combination of techniques. It's not solo the techniques that come from only one school of thought or one school of therapy. Okay, so this is just a table that lists each therapy. So psychodynamic therapy looks at the problems as being rooted in deep-seated unresolved conscious conflicts. And the emphasis in therapy is to discover the underlying unconscious conflicts and to work with a client to develop insight. So this is one form of insight therapy. It's not looking to change. Okay, in psychodynamic therapies, the most widely used approach is psychoanalysis, and this involves techniques such as free association and dream analysis, wherein the therapist plays a very active role by interpreting what the patient or client recounts or reports in the activity. And then we have humanistic therapies that are also insight therapies. They're aimed to allow the patient to gain greater insight into their own psychology, and they regard that the person's problem is rooted in that they're not functioning at the level of the optimal level of development that they should be. So they need to reach their fullest potential. Okay, so they haven't attained their fullest potential yet. And so the therapy emphasizes to develop awareness of the inherent potential for growth. And some specific techniques involve person-centered therapy. So this is Carl Rogers' technique, and which includes unconditional positive regard, genuineness, accurate empathy, and active listening. Self-appreciation is emphasized in this technique. And then we have behavioral therapies. So behavioral therapies regard the overt responses as being the root cause of the problem. So the person has acquired some form of maladaptive behavior through classical or operant conditioning. So in this therapy, there's an emphasis on eliminating by the maladaptive behavior by learning adaptive behavior. And this is reinforced or sustained by changes in the environment consisting of rewards and punishers. Okay? And I gave an example of that earlier. And then we have the nature of therapy of techniques is to observe the behavior and its controlling conditions. So there are the antecedents. Remember, the behavioral analysis involves finding out what the antecedents are. Okay, so the example I gave is the parent asking the child to pick up his toys and the child having a temper tantrum. Okay, so the antecedent is being asked to do something and then responding by having a temper tantrum. And the consequence is that the parent ends up picking up the toys. So the consequence is reinforcing the maladaptive behavior. So the behavior analyst will propose to recommend to the parent that they change the consequence. Okay, so changing the consequence by instating some type of a punisher to eliminate the maladaptive behavior would be effective. And then in cognitive therapies, the root of the problem is in the person's way of thinking, their thinking patterns. So here the client has developed inappropriate thoughts, and these are self-defeating thoughts, such as, I haven't studied as much as I wanted to, so I'm going to fail the exam. Or, there's no need to try, I always fail. Okay, so these are self-defeating thoughts. And so the therapy emphasizes changing feelings and behaviors by changing cognitions. So in contrast to behavior therapy, which aims to reverse the maladaptive behavior by eliminating it and replacing it with adaptive behavior, here the root of the problem is in the person's thinking. So first, the therapist will assist the client in changing their thinking patterns. So this is going to involve becoming aware of the self-defeating thoughts, and then challenging these self-defeating thoughts. Okay, so challenging them through questioning, like, has there ever been a time where you succeeded in doing something, even if you thought that you weren't able to? Or how would someone else respond to what you're saying, someone close to you? Okay, so challenge the irrational, self-defeating beliefs and change them with constructive statements. And the example I gave is, while I didn't study as much as I wanted to, I still have a chance to do well in the exam. I'll rely on my knowledge and give it my best shot, okay?